Welcome back to the WWIA Podcast. We hope you're enjoying this special podcast series on the John McDaniel story. If you are, please do us a favor and leave us a review on iTunes, Spotify, or your preferred podcast service. Let's learn more about John's military service as we dive into Part 2, Ranger School.
Okay, hey, I'm back. I just took a little tactical pause there. I'm going to talk about. We're back on my story here, and we're on Ranger School. Okay, so let me just frame this up by saying, the same thing I think is true today as it was back then. I ultimately graduated from Ranger School as Class 1088 for the record. Okay, and so it means I graduated in 88, the 10th course. I don't know, maybe it's like 12 a year, maybe something like that. I don't know, it's changed quite a bit. Back then there was 4 phases. There was Fort Benning or city phase where they just weeded you out or attempted to weed you out, and we lost, probably 50% of the class back then, didn't make it through city phase or phase 1, at Fort Benning. Phase 2 was on to Dahlonega, Georgia in the mountains, mountaineering training. And phase 3 was in Florida, and it was the swamp phase. So went from Dahlonega, Georgia, down to Eglin Air Force Base, and you did the swamp phase. And then the last phase was desert in Dugway, Utah. That's now gone. I think it's just 3 phases now. But anyway, so for the old school Rangers, that's what you did. You did essentially 4 phases, and then you graduated, and there were like 2 weeks per phase. So, this idea, Ranger School is the premier leadership. It's a leadership course. It's less of a gut check today than it was back then. And I know everybody says, hey, the last hard Ranger School class was the one they went to. And, and I get that. I think in the 70s it was, pretty brutal, and then in the 80s, when I went through, I think it had its brutal moments. It was, difficult. I'm not saying it's any more or less difficult today because, I don't have that experience, but I can tell you it was no cakewalk. I don't reckon it's a cakewalk today. But, just the anticipation of going to Ranger School was just like, wow, holy crap, I'm going. Because if you graduate successfully from Ranger School, you're authorized to wear the coveted Ranger tab. And you wear that on your uniform. And it's super cool. It's the Ranger tab, and anybody who sees it knows that you're a Ranger, and that's big medicine. That's big juju in the Army, but it's a leadership school, but they put all kinds of stress on you. Back then, they deprived you of school of chow. You got deprived of sleep, and you were, stressed. And I remember, later, I'll fast forward the tape of, 3 or 5 years, I think it is. And, I later went on to be a Ranger. I was a Ranger instructor after I left the 3rd Ranger Battalion. I'll talk about that too. But, my boss at the time, Clyde Newman, came into my office. And he throws this big packet on my desk, and the Army had come into Ranger School, and they had done, I don't know how many millions, like an $8 million study to follow Ranger through all, the Ranger students through all the phases of Ranger School and study them, take their blood, take, fluid samples, and trying to find out what's going on, with Ranger. Why are we losing so many of these guys to this course? Is it the chow? Is it the sleep? What is it? Congress got involved and threw a bunch of money at this thing, and they had to, some folks come in and strapping wrist watches on Rangers and dunking them in tanks and checking their body fat percentages and monitoring, their heart rate and, all the sleep and all this stuff, right? Massive study. And Clyde Newman, my battalion commander's got a packet of about 3 inches thick, and he throws it on my desk. He goes, something, Ranger? And I was like, what's that, sir? He goes, the Army just spent $8 million figuring out something that we already knew. I was like, "Oh yeah, what's that, sir?" He goes, "Ranger school fucks you up." I was like, "Yes, sir." Sorry for the colorful language there. I beg your pardon, but that's what he said, and the story's better told that way. So, anyway, if you've got virgin ears, I beg your pardon. So, anyway, so there we have it. So Fort Benning, phase 1 of Ranger School. You got to pass like all kinds of physical tests, and that I had no problems with that. Never had a problem with the physical stuff. I don't want to say it came easy, but I was fortunate enough to never get injured. I was in great shape. I was an athlete, so I was good there. But in the first phase, at Fort Benning, I actually got an honor graduate go, which is the highest go. You got to do a patrol. There's a ranger instructor there. You're given a problem set, a mission. You got your rangers with you, your squad, and you got to go perform. And they're evaluating everything you do and everything that you fail to do. And so the highest accolade you could get, you're just looking for a go. You get a no-go, you get one more whack at that pinata. You get a double no-go, you're done. That's it. You're out. Okay, you don't pass go, you're done. So there's some pressure there, real pressure there. And so the very first patrol I draw, I perform well. I get an honor graduate go. So I'm moving on to the next phase. Okay, when it's time to go to Dahlonega, Georgia, to the mountain phase, I'm sitting on an honor graduate go, feeling pretty good about myself, and got a good squad. Everything's going great. And Ranger Nolan is my Ranger buddy. They pair you up. Everybody's got a Ranger buddy. Anyway, so we get to the mountain phase, and they bust us from Fort Benning to Dahlonega, in the middle of the night. Of course, we're all sleeping because it's, whatever it is, 4 or 5 hour bus drive through the mountains up through the Tennessee Valley Divide to the Mountain Ranger Camp. And everybody's bagging out hard. And we get there, get off the bus, everybody's, elbows and butts flying everywhere. Get off the bus, and they got there goes the floodlights, and you're like, well, now you're awake. Okay, and they got us sitting in, and remember in this parking lot, the floodlights are on us, and their ranger instructors were meeting the cadre. It's like 3 o'clock in the morning, And, they might as well say, Mama May I, dog face, and the banana patch. You're like, you're not really tuned in. None of us were, because we've been sleeping, and we're just happy to be there, sort of. And they said a bunch of things like, hey, if you have this, you have that, here's contraband, blah, 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 blah. One of the things they apparently said, and I probably heard it, I just didn't pay attention to it, is that if you have prescription medication, you need to get it checked at the Troop Medical Clinic, the TMC. Well, I didn't have any prescription medication, so I blew that off. And I was like, just one of a bazillion things they're informing you that you can or cannot do at this camp. It's just an extension of the last one, sort of thing. So, long story short, we are we're getting our orders, and we're getting ready to go off on missions. I draw a mission. I get a go. Okay, in both. In my patrol, I got to go. So I got to go in the first phase and to go in the second phase, and I'm already looking in my mind to go into the swamps. Well, they're what those ranger instructors would do is, when we were getting in the bay doing planning and getting our operations orders from the patrol leader, whoever he was at the time, the ranger student who was in charge, the patrol leader, the PL as we call him, he's up there giving his operations order, but in the background, the ranger instructors have had us lay out all of our kit. Okay, so you got your poncho liner, your e-tool goes here, your toilet kit goes here, all your meals, everything's laid out in accordance to some sort of plan that they've given you. And that way, the ranger instructors can go by and see if you have all your stuff. And they can also use the opportunity to dig through your stuff to find out if you have anything you shouldn't have. Because Ranger's tricky, Rangers will do some things like, hey, Mom, write her mom a note. Hey, Mom, could you make some white chocolate in the form of a bar of soap and put it in a bar of plastic soap container? That way I'll have chocolate, and the ranger instructors will think it's soap. I didn't do that, but I know guys that did. Just trying to get over. But I didn't do anything like that. But as it gets to my layout, my rucksack, with all my stuff laid out, he's spending it a lot. I'm looking out of the corner of my eye, and I'm like, oh my God, that's Sergeant Melville, man. He's digging through my crap. It looks like he's got something in his hand. I'm like, what the heck did he find in there? And I'm racking my head, and so finally the patrol, the PL finishes his order. We're supposed to fall in on our gear and pack it back up, and there's Sergeant Melville. Come here, Ranger. I'm like, yes, Sergeant. Now, understand, I'm a lieutenant, but in Ranger School, all your rank is stripped off. It just says McDaniel and U.S. Army. You don't wear anything else besides your name tape and U.S. Army, and that's it. And he probably, he knows if he wants to know what my rank is, I'm sure he could find out. And I assume that he knows, that I'm a lieutenant, but it doesn't matter. Your rank means nothing in Ranger School. Here's a Sergeant E6, Melville. Never forget it. And he's got a baggie with aspirin in it, and I recognize that as mine, but I don't recognize it as prescription medication, because it's not. I bought it over the counter, and I had it because my Ranger buddy was had cellulitis. Aspirin's a good little thing. If you got a headache, whatever. And he goes, Melville's got this baggie of aspirin now. He's holding it up at eye level, at his eye level, and he's about 3 centimeters from my face. And he says, "What's this, Ranger?" And I said, "Well, that's aspirin, Sergeant." And I'm standing at parade rest, and there's an officer standing at parade rest for an NCO, because that's what you do. And he goes, "Did you get this checked at the TMC, Ranger?" And I say, "No, Sergeant, because it's not." And he says, "You don't have any excuses in Ranger School. Either you did it or you didn't do it." And he says, "I'm going to F you up, Ranger." And so he puts me aside with all my kit. And now my squad is now turned into twice its size. They did a resection. So they made Ranger School, instead of being a 9-man squad, it's now 18. Okay, and they combined 2 squads. You're doing section patrols. Now, mind you, I got to go already. Previous to this is like second week of Rangers, so the 4th week of Ranger School. I'm in the mountains. I already got my go, but I've been put aside because I had contraband. I had a little baggie of aspirin, and that I shouldn't have had. And so I didn't know what was going on, but I got these squad radios taped to me because I was going to be an RTO, radio telephone operator on this mission. They're PRC 126s, and I got them, strapped onto my load-bearing equipment. And I've taken 100-mile-an-hour tape, what you would probably talk about or refer to as duct tape, and I've really got these things secured to me because that's the Ranger way. I mean, they're not coming off. We're getting on a helicopter. We're flying, 20 kilometers out to this mission that we're going to go do, and I'm ready to rock and roll, but they pulled me aside. And so I'm standing there waiting to find out what my fate is, and here comes from the headquarters, the battalion commander, and the sergeant major. I mean, his number one enlisted guy, and the battalion commander, a colonel, and the sergeant major are coming down from the head shed to meet me with Sergeant Melville. So, long story short, the battalion commander, Johnny something or other, and I've got the paperwork somewhere, but he starts asking me some softball questions, and then he says something that I don't like. This is a lieutenant colonel talking to a Ranger student. I'm a lieutenant, but not in Ranger School, not. And Sergeant Melville's monitoring all this, and so is the sergeant major, and I can tell the sergeant major don't like me at all. I mean, just by the way I look, I think he doesn't like me. And so the battalion commander said something to me that I think it offended me somehow, some way, like I was going to be offended, or he did. And I pulled my finger out and I pointed it at him and I said something. I don't know what I said. It wasn't offensive, but I pointed my finger at him. And the sergeant major, that was it. That was a straw that broke the camel's back. It didn't matter. The sergeant major just reaches into his pocket, pulls out this buck knife that's the size of my foot, and he grabs me and he pulls me into him and he says, "Ranger, you just pointed your finger at a lieutenant colonel. You're done." And he takes the buck knife and he starts cutting the radios off me, cutting the tape that's got the radio secured to my load-bearing equipment. He's cutting it off. He cuts them both off, and then standing right next to me, because he was summoned, is a ranger from my section, a guy by the name of Tim Callis, who I'm still good friends with today. I hope Timmy's listening to this, man. Because the two radios are handed from the sergeant major to Tim Callis, and Tim Callis is looking at me with this look on his face like, oh, Jesus, dude, you're done. And I'm like, I'm just looking at him, not saying anything, like, yeah, I know I'm done. And so, long story short, they wrote me a special observation report, an SOR, for failure to follow instructions because I didn't get my aspirin checked at the TMC. It wasn't even, issued to me, so I must have had it in my little DOP kit or something. I don't remember. But long story short, I pointed my finger to Lieutenant Colonel. I shouldn't have done that, and I had to do it all over again. So I had to do that entire phase. My Ranger go, my patrol go gets erased, and I got to go all the way back through the mountain phase again. And oh, by the way, there's a 2-week cycle break, so I'm actually there for 4 more weeks. Little vacation there, painting rocks and doing KP at the Mountain Ranger camp. Yes, I did. And so I was a recycle, okay? And again, I go back. It doesn't matter, okay? It doesn't matter how you start. It's how you finish, okay? It's how you finish that matters, not how you start, okay? There's going to be setbacks all along the way. It's just a matter of how much heart and how much guts you got, and how much intestinal fortitude are you willing to muster to get done what needs to get done. In this case, graduate from Ranger School with the coveted Ranger tab on your shoulder. So I spend 4 more weeks, get my go that time, no problem. But now you got to integrate with a new squad. I mean, it's just setback after setback after setback at this point, And so I end up going to the Florida phase. I get through Florida phase like pretty much unscathed, no problem. Get my go, and move on to Dahlonega. This is the last phase. Now, as luck would have it, and we're in WWIA, Utah. We jumped in. Okay, got in planes, Eglin Air Force Base, loaded up, flew to WWIA, Utah, proving grounds. I don't know, what is that, maybe an 8-hour, 9-10-hour flight, something. It's a long flight, and they open up the doors. It's, the sun's just coming up, and Rangers are shotgunning both doors, jumping into WWIA, and it's pure silence. Like, pure silence. I mean, you're getting out of the airplane and the sun's coming up. It's the desert. It's the first time I've ever been in the desert. And long story short, I draw the last patrol. Like, that's what the last thing you want, after 2 weeks of being in the desert, being a good little ranger, okay, supporting your squad, the last thing you want to do is get the last patrol because everybody's tabbed out. Everybody's tabbed out. They got their stuff. And now it's your turn. And they're droning and they're tired. And it's the last phase of Ranger School and everybody's just beat. Now, you talk about leadership challenge. Should I motivate a bunch of Rangers who are already tabbed out and all they got to do is just cooperate and graduate, and now you got to lead them on the last mission, the last day of the last mission? Well, long story short, my patrol, as the patrol leader, got compromised on before we got to the objective, and I got a no-go. And I had to do that phase over. And P.S., there was a cycle break, so I always say I had to do Ranger School twice because I was there, basically for twice the period that most people should be. But anyway, so the second time around in WWIA, Utah, of course, there's 4 more weeks there, 2 weeks cycle. I mean, 6 weeks in WWIA, Utah, 6 weeks, same thing in the mountain phase. So I did Ranger School essentially twice. But, I graduated. I finally got my last patrol. I got to go back to Fort Benning. My mom and dad come down for graduation school. My dad pins my Ranger tab on me, and poof, Ranger McDaniel's born. Okay, so that's my Ranger School story. And, there's lots to that. And but I think the number one lesson there that you ought to take with you is don't quit. There's going to be setbacks. It's what you do with those setbacks, that really matter. And I remember, I'll tell you this quick sidebar. I remember when I was at the Mountain Ranger camp, and in between the cycle break, I got a chance to get to a payphone, and I, had some quarters or something, and I dialed up my parents and I, who were back in Oshkosh, Wisconsin, and I had talked to my dad, and they'd been reading all my letters that I sent home and sharing some of the trials and tribulations that I was going through. And my dad said to me, "And John, why don't you just come home?" I remember him saying that. And it struck me. It's like, like I said, "Dad, I can't. Like, I can't." Like, it was not even, like, you couldn't even get me to think about that. Like, I'm not coming home. I'll come home when I get my Ranger tab and they put me in, I get some leave or something. But wild horses couldn't drag me out of here, period dot. And so that's the mentality you got to have in your head before you get there. Like, they're going to have to kill me before I'm not quitting. Like, there's no quit in me, and it's a mental, frame of mind. Guys get hurt all the time. You can't do anything about that, and it's unfortunate. They get medically discharged all the time out of Ranger School, for whatever reason. But, this idea of, quitting, it's not going to happen. Not for me, all right? So, and it ought to be like that for you, no matter what you decide to do. Throw yourself into it. Decide beforehand that you're not going to quit and you're not going to fail, and you're just going to keep going at it until you get it. That's, there's the life hack there. So that's Ranger School. That's number 7 on my list, and number 8 is the the first unit that I got assigned to, because after Ranger School, they send me to Fort Polk, where I've got my little diamond, but on top of my diamond I got a Ranger tab. And so that makes me very happy, and that, feel like that sets me apart, and I certainly earned it. And so, Ranger McDaniel, Lieutenant McDaniel at this point, is very happy to be on active duty, and still unsure about what's going to happen at Fort Polk. And that'll be the next chapter. I'll talk about, my first assignment as a lieutenant at Fort Polk, Louisiana, because it includes a combat tour as well. So we'll take a little break here.
To learn more about the mission of the Wounded Warriors in Action Foundation and how you can get involved, please visit our website at WWIAF.org or follow our social media pages on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn. Thank you for listening to the WWIA Podcast and for helping us honor, connect, and heal our combat wounded Purple Heart heroes through the power of the great outdoors.
If you like what you're listening to here and would like to join our team in our mission to bring healing power and recovery to America's Purple Heart heroes, please become part of our Sponsor a Hero team by clicking on the link in the podcast notes or by going to WWIAF.org/sponsor. That's WWIAF.org/sponsor. Our heroes need you now more than ever. Thank you.